Welcome to another I-80 football show here on the I-80 Club. I am, as always, Josh Peterson, and again, I appreciate you joining me for another episode. We drop these each and every Thursday, nice and early in the morning in the podcast feed, and available on YouTube at 8 a.m. each and every Thursday. We have had some killer guests so far, and that does not change on today's episode. Parker Fleming, you might know him from social media as @StatsOWar. I've had a chance to have him on my radio show on Sportsmanlike Conduct a couple of times over the last year and change, but I wanted a longer conversation to talk about where advanced stats in college football have been and where they are going moving forward. I know in the early part of a college football season, a lot of people are always wondering, okay, wait, this team is ranked that, but they haven't played very well. Or wait, why is that team ranked so low? They've played really well. We try to have a conversation about why that happens, why priors are and aren't important, and what it can mean for the season moving forward. So we talked about that. Wanted also to pick Parker's brain about the stats that we aren't talking about enough. We also have a moment of silence for the Eckel and why that stat name has changed and why that stat is so important. So much more. We also talk a little bit about Nebraska's big matchup with Michigan coming up on Saturday afternoon. This is a really fun conversation, so different than anything that I've ever done before here on the I-80 Club, and so I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I very much think you will. Speaking of Nebraska and Michigan, we have an incredible weekend on tap here inside of the I-80 Club. The Big Ten Breakdown with Ben Stevens drops on Friday morning. He will prepare you for that matchup, the huge Illinois-Indiana game that is coming up Saturday night as well, and all of the other matchups inside of the Big Ten Conference. That comes out on Friday. And then on Saturday morning coffee show in the morning with yours truly and Jack Mitchell. And then we will have after Nebraska football. Started about 8:30 on Saturday night. I have the post-game duties on my radio station, 1620 The Zone. So we'll be on at about 8:30 to give our entire reaction to what happened in Lincoln in the biggest game of the Matt Rule era to this point in time. And then moving on into Sunday, Matt McMaster and I are back for Before the Witching Hour. The Cowboys and the Bears play this weekend. How are we feeling about that one? There will be another patron episode of Volleyball State that will go live at 7 o'clock for subscribers, and that will go up free a couple of days later. So we have a lot ahead over the next few days, and we would love to have you. Patreon.com/I80 Club is where to go to get access to every episode that we do. Bonus episodes like the I-80 Live that Jack and I recorded on Wednesday night. Plus, the access to our Discord server is there as well. And we have a great community. So fun during a college football Saturday, and especially the Husker games, where a lot of conversation is happening between Jack, myself, and all of our subscribers as well. Patreon.com/I80 Club. And then, of course, a like and a subscribe here to the YouTube page for the I-80 Club as we continue to grow. That very much helps us grow. All right, enough of the prelude. Let's get to this interview. Parker Fleming, @StatsOWar. This was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoy it. Parker joins me now on the I-80 Football Show. So excited to have on the I-80 Football Show this week. You might know him on social media @StatsOWar from CFB Graphs. It is Parker Fleming joining the podcast for the first time. Parker, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you this week?
Man, I'm doing great. Always a pleasure to be on and to talk ball. And man, the season just gets here so quick and then happens so fast. I feel like I can't believe we're looking towards October, but I'm excited to be here. I will say I'm going to Eugene this weekend. I don't do where I live out in the mountains. I don't do a ton of live football, especially at the D1 level or the FBS level, but a friend bullied me into it. I'm going to go out and hang out with him and see the Ducks and the Beavers. And I've never been to Autzen before. So I'm feeling the good college football vibes right now because I'm super excited for that.
Oh, that is awesome. I've been to Autzen 2 times over the years, and that stadium is a wonderful experience. I think it lives up to the hype. And while you're going to go see an overmatched game, at least on paper, it is interesting because obviously those two schools do not like each other in the least.
Yeah, I think the rivalry environment, I mean, you know what they say, when it comes to the rivalry games, you got to throw the record books out the windows, right? And anything can happen, but should be fun to just take in the environment. I think that's, golly, I'm going to sound old and sentimental here, but in the age of the internet and the college football playoff and everything, like it's really good and healthy to just like go to a game on a campus on a Saturday in a fall and, remember what this is really all about. So I'm very, very excited about that.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I was at games each of the last 2 weekends, and this Saturday, and then the Saturdays after that, especially the one after that when we get a couple of heavyweight matchups. I'm very excited to sit on my couch, but I did enjoy traveling around a little bit. Parker, to kick off the conversation, and we're going to do some really fun things on today's episode, but I know a lot of people who are maybe not in the data space get like a little confused about some of what they're seeing in terms of like September numbers, because they're like, whoa. Why is special teams ranked so low when there haven't been a whole lot of issues? And, well, why is this team still ranked so high even though they might have a couple of losses? I know that, I'm talking to you today. I could have a conversation with a Bill Connolly, a Kelly Ford, et cetera, right, in terms of how their formula works. But in terms of what you are doing at this moment in time with 3 full weeks plus the week 0, how much of it is about the here and now versus how much of what you try to do is still building and maybe those off-season priors, whether it's recruiting or recent success or lack thereof, into your formula in the early part of a college football season?
Yeah, so I think priors are being hotly contested right now, and it's fun because this idea of like Bayesian thinking, even just the slightest whisper of Bayesianism here of having a prior and then updating information, it's good for the public to encounter it. It's a little complicated, and so we're working through that publicly and figuring everything out. And there are certainly misapplications of it, of refusing to update on new information and kind of understanding that. But the general idea is you have an idea of a college football team going into a season. That doesn't mean your idea is good, but I can make a very simple elevator pitch for why priors are important. Josh, who's going to have a better season before the season? If I asked you, Kent State or Nebraska, who's a better football team?
I would say, Nebraska.
Nebraska. Why would we treat them as flat? Why would we treat them as the same, right? Are we going to be wrong for some of those? Absolutely. That's why you got to have a process for updating. But when I do a team ratings model, I start out with preseason priors, and I try to be very open-handed. I am not the smartest football person in the world. I do not have a singular view where I can look at a team and be like, oh, I know for a fact that this team is going to be, plus 28.2 points as opposed to plus 27.3 points, right? I try to incorporate market information, incorporate other sources, and really get a good sense of, all right, what is the consensus of this? And then as I observe their game, I say, okay, how crazy was that result based on my projection? How much do I need to update? The basic formulation is it's not an ELO model, but ELO models, I think, are a really easy way to kind of understand this. You should treat every game with, all right, I've got team A as ranked like this, team B ranked like this. That gives me a win probability. Let's observe the game, and then let's update our ratings to make our data fit better what we have seen happening. And, it's probably not a good idea to just use points. I do have a points component, but I also adjust the scores for things like how many drive, like how many possessions, how many plays you ran, how much you ran versus passed, your EPA, all that stuff to get a better idea of the true score. But it's still saying, here's my projection of the true score. Here's the reality of the true score. Let's put those in a blender. And you obviously have a little bit different of a blender at the beginning of the season. I'm going to trust teams later in the season a little bit more than I do at the beginning of the season and kind of phase those out. But it's very good to have a good, well-calibrated sense of here's how I believe these teams are going to perform, and then update that as we go.
Parker, I think that I had you on my radio show this offseason. I know that my host and I had a few other data people on, and one of the through lines of all of those discussions was, wow, the top of the sport really seems to be closer together than we could remember in recent years. It's such a small sample size sport, of course, in college football, but through 3 full weeks, has that borne itself out for what you're seeing right now with college football in 25?
I think that's borne itself out on the field. Like you look at the gap in just, per play efficiency, and normally we see, I'll do something that's good for our visual listeners and bad for our auditory listeners. But you think about the distribution, it's not linear of like, oh, these teams are all just kind of spaced together. It's actually kind of this slopey curve historically, where really good teams are really, really good. And then the degree by which you're better than the next team gets smaller as we kind of go down this curve. And that's still true this year. I think there's more uncertainty about who is good. We've seen some inconsistency in performances. We've seen some truly bizarre results, like in North Texas, if you just use in-season data, is grading out really, really well because they've been beating the brakes off people, right? And so priors are important there, but it is weird. Something I've thought long and hard about this offseason is really kind of this trend we've been seeing the last couple of years, where there's this mode of hey, we care now. Like it used to be the Kirby Smart Georgia when they were so good, they'd play a bad game, whatever. Like they'd win by 7 and then they'd win by 7 and then they'd play a top 10 team and win by 40 or whatever. I'm being hyperbolic there, but like, it's like, oh, could you just model, does Georgia care this week? Or Ohio State flips the switch, gets hot at the end and can beat everybody. There is some sort of like, we're taking it seriously component that isn't for lack of trying, but it just, through development, through coaching, through reps, it kind of clicks for these teams. And I think there's almost, you could think about it like predicting a wildfire, for instance. I sound like a crazy person right now. That's okay. This is fun. This is college football. But like, a wildfire is going to be, the spread of a wildfire is going to be predicated by how much, when's the most recent wildfire, how much tinder there's on the ground, how hot it is, how dry it is. And then you need the spark, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to think about how to do empirically is like, which teams have the requisite, underlying fundamentals so that if they got the spark, I would be like, yes, that is the flying death machine. That is the team that is going to go win in the playoffs and do that. And I think that's how you kind of have to think about it with, especially this year, with so many teams that are potentially very good. Like USC looks like they're waking up. Oregon, very, very solid, addressed some needs in the portal. Alabama had a bad first game, but it looked really, really good since, and they have more talent than anyone. Oklahoma defense looks to be resurged and their offense looks to be working out. Like you can make a case for a lot of these teams being very, very good. Miami, who portaled an entire defensive line over the last 2 years, defensive and offensive line over the last 2 years, and looks really, really solid. You're saying, okay, do they have the fundamentals to really hit that next level?
I love that answer, and that is a really interesting way to view it because, if Georgia played like they did in some of their recent games against Tennessee, they probably would have lost. But, I mean, there is, of course, that real-life human component of raising your level of play because it is a big football game or lowering your level of play because it is a team that you expect to dominate because you're a blue blood Ohio State, Georgia-type program.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of, I think that's where it gets fun. I do feel sometimes a little stifled trying to look at the entire nation as opposed to just focusing on one team, because you can start to think about those. Like you can really dive in and you have the time to, watch the games multiple times and kind of understand what players are doing and saying, oh, this guy would have had 3 more touchdowns if, quarterback had seen him open. That's something correctable. Or, I was watching Auburn Baylor to start the season, and it's early in the season, so you could focus in, and everybody's saying, wow, Auburn's run offense is awesome. And I'm like, man, Baylor's run defense is actually really bad. And it's not, hey, they're just getting pushed around by an SEC offense. That would be actually okay for a Big 12 team. You say like, yeah, you're going to lose against the SEC athletes. But if you were just getting pushed out of the way, but they were like fitting the run poorly, and being able to go in and kind of granularly track stuff like that and be really, really detailed gives you a little more insight into that. Okay, is this something where we could get really motivated and perform well and outplay our metrics, or are our metrics doing a good job of kind of saying, this is who we are?
Yeah. So Parker, one of the things that I wanted to do with you today was talk about like maybe under-discussed stats or things to pay attention to in college football today. And we can do that in a few minutes, but I wanted to use a discussion from last year that my radio host and I talked about a lot. And that was when we stumbled upon the great graphics that you put up for all the matchups. And we found this thing and we were like, what in the world is Eckel? We're like trying to figure out what is Eckel. And I think we finally eventually reached out to you and brought you on our show because we're like, can you please explain this stat to us? And I ended up really enjoying that because and correct me if I'm wrong, Eckel is getting inside of the 40-yard line. And then after that, it was the number of points that you have once you get inside of the 40-yard line, the opposition's 40-yard line. And it was so interesting because, I mean, it's very similar, of course, to red zone, but moving 40 yards to get to 40 yards away from the end zone, obviously a little bit quote unquote easier than getting within 20 yards. That stat for you, how did that come to be? And maybe why was it so important, or why is it so important in the sport of football?
Yeah. So I have a sad announcement for me, but I've made a decision and we need to have a little bit of moment of silence here. Eckel is dead. As a name. My friend, among other people and some coaches too, that were like, man, this is cool, but I don't get it. It was really becoming hard to explain to a point where it became less useful. And my friend Sam Schwartzstein over at Amazon Primecast on Thursday nights, he does that and everything. And he was talking to me about branding and stuff and was like, I think you probably need to change this. So it is now quality drive rate, which makes more sense because you know exactly what it is when I say it. Mm-hmm. So shout out to people helping me with that and making that a little more sense. But general idea is the same. It came from out of one, effectively just arguing with Gary Patterson about time of possession. He and I had a great relationship in the DMs for a couple of years when I was covering TCU full time and doing all the stats stuff. And I honestly am not sure if he likes me or not. I'm pretty sure I'm leaning towards no, but we talked a lot, and I really appreciate that and respect him. But basically he's saying like how long you hold the ball. There are ways where that's important, right? Like average drive is 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Each team gets 6 possessions and a half. If you start adding and subtracting, you can do some math on that, whatever. But what you do with the ball is much more important than how long you hold the ball. Just at the extremes. I think there was a game, it might've been Wake Forest and Wisconsin played in a bowl game in like the 2017, 18, 19, somewhere in there. And Wisconsin just blew the brakes off them because Wake Forest like way outgained them, way had better time of possession because literally Wake Forest would like drive to the red zone and then just drop the ball over and over and over again. I was like, okay, time of possession is not doing it for me. And so I did some research. Hockey has a couple stats, Corsi and Fenwick, which are just kind of measures of shots or unblocked shots and how much of the game's productive activity did you control. And that's really where I got into Eckel. That's actually where the name Eckel came from. Corsi was named after a coach with a funny mustache. Like that's all they named it after. And so I was looking for something like that. Alex Kirshner over at Split Zone Duo had written about the 2004 Navy team in the Emerald Bowl that had like a 16-minute drive, the longest drive in college football history. Their fullback was Eckel. He played for the Patriots for a little bit. I was like, boom, Eckel rate. That's where we're going. And so that's where the name originally came from before we rebranded. But it is kind of an understanding of, if college football is a game of opportunity creation and opportunity capitalization, which makes me sound like an investment banker, but I think it's true. You want to create good opportunities and you want to capitalize on them. It's a good, simple, flawed, but good and simple metric that kind of helps you understand how often are you getting to places where it's more likely that a team scores than they don't. And then how often are you scoring in those opportunities? So the canonical example of where this was awesome was 2023, Texas. I think they were top 15 in Eckel rate. And I've got to be better about that. They were top 15 in quality drive rate. And I think they were 109th in points per quality possession. How'd they lose that Washington game?
I was going to say they get down inside the 10-yard line and their season comes to an end.
And you're like, man, this is real. Yeah, there's an issue. Yeah. And we've seen it. Texas stinks finishing drives and so moving through. So that's kind of where it came up from. And it is simple. You can do it in a rate. So for offense or defense, how often do you get into these states? And if you control for, short field drives, special teams returns, turnovers, and all that stuff, you get a good measure of offense and defense. So you filter those out. You can also do it as the points, see how well you're finishing, how well you're not finishing. And then you can do it as a ratio, which kind of is that time of possession analog to say, how much are you controlling the game? So I think last year, for instance, I just pulled up 2 random teams on the matchups. Like last year, Air Force was 46% game control through quality drive ratio. That's 107th in the nation. Iowa was 56. That's 37th in the nation. So you can see kind of the range a little bit there of what's good and bad of you're going to get between 40 and 60% of the quality drives on the season average. And whether you can swing that in your favor and then capitalize on it tells you a lot about if a football team is unlucky or just bad.
Parker, why the 40-yard line? What was it about that specific distance that you thought really was able to tell such a good story?
Yeah, so started with the 40-yard line. Shout out to Bill Conley and scoring opportunities. Everything that I've ever done in analytics is because someone else asked an interesting question and I extended it. That's how research works. And so he had scoring opportunities, and so I kind of started with that, and then I took EPA, expected points added, and just plotted a line that was like three curves: probability you score a touchdown, probability you score at all, probability you don't score. And looked at that curve and just found the point where it became more likely that you scored at all than you didn't score. And I think the 40 is a fine proxy. I actually dialed into the 37.5. So if you get a first down at the 37-yard line or closer, that's a quality drive, or a big play touchdown, right? Because if you go 80 yards, that's good. I'm not going to penalize you for that as well. So those are the definitions there. So just a slight refining of that. I'm sure that's era effects, not like Bill's was miscalibrated or anything. Like it's still a very useful proxy, and I'm just splitting hairs there with that. But it is the point where it's like, okay, the average team is going to score here. Now, one thing that I've tried to incorporate this offseason and haven't really been able to surface in a good way that compares across teams. If I plotted Akron and Ohio State and said, here's their probability to score from anywhere, that point is going to move way further for Ohio State, closer towards their 50, right? Because they're a better offense. They're going to score a lot more. Akron, that's going to move way closer to the goal line because they are not moving the ball as well. So there's huge team effects in that as well that I'm working on how to incorporate, but I think it's just good to hold those and have kind of a healthy understanding that like it does mean different things for different teams in some cases.
That is such an awesome answer. I love hearing the story. Quality drive rate. I got to build that into my head now. Quality drive rate. RIP moment of silence for Eckel. So when I hit you up over the weekend about the pod, one of the things that I mentioned I wanted to talk to you was most important or maybe under-discussed stats in college football. And I wanted to use this discussion as a jumping off point because, I mean, as you explained it does a great job of laying out, hey, why once you get to this area on the field, you really want to make sure you finish. That Texas team in 2023, of course, is probably pulling their hair out right now about that. So what is, like, when I throw out that prompt to you, was there like an immediate one or stats multiple that came to mind for you where you're like, that is something that maybe is under the surface and is not being discussed a whole lot right now?
Yeah, I think the most glaring one in college football, not the most accessible per se, but the most glaring one to understanding teams is a stat that I like to call rush rate over expected. And so a lot of times you hear teams talk about balance and, we want to be balanced in rushing and passing, but we see there's obvious situations. On 3rd and 2, you're going to rush more often than you are going to pass, right? Like in 2nd and 12, you're going to rush way less than you're going to pass generally. And so what my idea for rush rate over expected was to say, let's see how much the situation dictates what you're doing and then strip out that noise. So saying, accounting for the menu of plays that you see with a big caveat that bad teams are going to see 3rd and long longer. So they're going to pass more, right? Like there's some stuff in there that you've got to, nuance out. How much does the menu of plays that a team faces factor into their choice for run or pass? And I think that's really nice because there's an inherent selection bias in college football that goes woefully undiscovered. It's there in pro too, but I don't really care about pro football right now. And the idea is that like good mediocre teams with good talent can rush over bad teams. But if you can't pass and you don't choose to pass, that actually tells me something about the idea that, your passing game isn't as good. Like you can see these splits of, again, I just pulled up a random one here. Like Iowa's offense last year, 20th in EPA per rush, 103rd in EPA per drop back, right? Really bad split. But also they were 129th in rush rate over expected, meaning they rushed 15.9 percentage points more than the average team in any given situation. And so Iowa's rushing a ton. Their drop back, they're trying to do the triple option thing where they like hit those explosives on short plays. We'd actually expect to see with the lower volume, their pass offense to be much more efficient. But because it was so low, I actually downgraded their passing offense even more because they should be in those positive passing situations where they have favorable matchups where the numbers are a little bit better because they're not passing in those tougher situations. And so that kind of talks about the split there. It's really good to see on defense. For instance, I can go to Air Force again, just using an example. Air Force's defense last year was 46th in EPA per dropback. Very good. Like great pass defense, Air Force, good job. But they were 104th in rushing EPA per play. Teams, they were 134th in rush rate over expected. Teams were rushing against them at a rate that was just absurd because their run defense was so bad. So I don't want to look at Air Force's EPA per play on dropbacks and say, you were a top 50 defense. No one cared to test your passing because they could just run over you, right? So your pass defense is much worse than your metrics. So that rush rate over expectation really does help you kind of understand the bias in that run pass selection and how teams are doing different things at a very, very simple level in response to your strengths. So kind of getting into that matchup synergy there.
So Parker, is this a stat where the lower the number, or I guess the higher the number, closer to 136 right now in college football, that is unequivocally bad, or is there some conversation to be have about, well, it doesn't have to be the worst thing in the world on offense or defense?
I think it's bad. That's just a personal bias of mine. Like, I think generally if you're going to err on one side, you should err on the side of slinging the rock in college football. And we've seen that borne out. I think it's a measure of style though. So the metered answer there is it's not good or bad. I have it coded as 1 is good and 136 is bad, right? Just because that's my preference and it helps directionally there. But it's just a measure of style, saying like, how much do you rush or pass? And it really shouldn't be used to like pass a judgment on a team without looking at the efficiency. It's kind of a measure of volume and saying like, what are you trying to do? And then let me look at the efficiency and then I can interpret what you're doing.
Interesting. So I love that stat. I remember that was another one that is always in your graphics and trying to figure out, is this meaning good or bad things? And so it's going to be great moving forward as I do that. Was there another one or two that you think that's a stat that we need to be focusing on or talking about more?
Yeah, another one that stands out that's a little wonky as well, I alluded to this earlier with the quality drive rate, is just percentage of points that come on short field drives. And so that's one that I should probably be better about surfacing explicitly, but it's something I look at for every box score is like, great. Okay. I'm not giving your offense a ton of credit for you got a turnover on the 15 and you scored a touchdown, right? Or heaven forbid you kicked a field goal after starting on the 15 there. Right. And so looking at that, I think because college football is such a high variance game and because special teams just dramatically varies in quality across college football for some reason, that understanding which teams are the biggest beneficiaries of that and identifying whether it's sustainable or not is really, really important. I'll give you two examples last year. BYU and UNLV are on opposite ends of the spectrum there. BYU, great season, outperformed every dang metric you could have. They were negative net success rate in most of their wins, had plenty of games they should have lost. And shout out to Coach Shiitake. Like they did great. Like they were able to rally and perform and do really, really well. They had a bunch of short field drives from turnovers that were just not replicable. And it's year-to-year variance. We're seeing that come back to the ground a little bit this year. Like it's not something that you can predictably sustain over multiple seasons. UNLV, on the other hand, was playing Moneyball a little bit. They took Ricky White, an NFL draft prospect, a wide receiver, and put him on punt block. And they had the best starting field position in the nation. And so you look at two teams that both grade highly in starting field position and a number of drives that are short fields. And you see one of those is more sustainable than the other and gives me pause to think about, oh, well, the starting field position number actually means something different for both of these teams because of the way they got that starting field position and how that relates to the efficiency of offense and defense, which are, super important as we're trying to understand team quality.
Yeah, and Parker, at the beginning of the answer, you mentioned special teams. I've had conversations with quite a few data people, whether it's in pro or college, and special teams always seems to be this really interesting, I don't know if conundrum is the right word, but like the importance of it and how to figure it out and then apply that to matchups. What is your view on special teams, Ben? Because while there are three phases, that has the fewest plays in any football game. And yet, around here covering Nebraska, I have watched that affect games in a horrifically negative capacity. But then I also see them doing pretty well so far this year, and they're still ranked in the 100s. I know a lot of that's because of the priors. It's just very interesting to me. What's your view of special teams been over the years?
It has evolved substantially. I used to not care about it at all. I'd be like, why are you practicing punt block? Like that's taking time away from other productive activities at practice. Like, I think you should just be as good as you need to be. And you want to be average at special teams and that's good enough. Like, obviously don't be really, really bad, but I wasn't convinced that teams could get good. UNLV last year did challenge a little bit of that. I think that was a really sharp move to play your best players is a bold strategy, but a lot of people don't do that in those unique ways. And a wide receiver on punt block is different and new and innovative. I also read a book this offseason that I recommend for anyone who's interested in data, whether you're a Premier League fan or not. How to Win the Premier League by Ian Graham. Excellent read. One of my favorite data books. He kind of walks through how they built up a data program from scratch, how it incorporated with the coaches and the scouts, what they did to really find a successful way to run a team. And I just super valuable there. He has a chapter where he talks about set pieces. And apologies if you're not a soccer person. I'm trying to be a soccer person. I'm very interested in it. I'm going to say some dumb things here too. But the general idea is like set pieces are not correlated with open field success, really. And the skills that make you good at open play are not the skills that make you good at set pieces. And set pieces are super high variance. But when we're looking at standings and final standings, whether you score a goal on a set piece or you score one in open play doesn't really correlate with your final outcome. It's not like, oh, bad teams are scoring more set pieces, or, oh, good teams always score set pieces. It doesn't matter. A goal is a goal is a goal. And so what some teams really steer into is finding guys who are odd fits for open play, but saying, hey, you're tall. Hey, you can jump high. Hey, you've got a great header. We're going to put you in, find a role for you in open play so that we have this huge advantage in set pieces, and we can try to influence the game in these margins here. Special teams is set pieces. I think that's where I'm landing right now. I've got to do some more work. I don't know. It's an empirical claim that special teams points is not correlated with final standings in the sense that good teams and bad teams both get special teams points. I actually think that might be false. So I've got to validate that. But my initial prior is that like there's something to the idea that special teams is a high point of leverage where the skills are not correlated to open play in football. And you could be able to leverage the game in certain ways by emphasizing that lifts the quality of your open field play.
Wow, what an interesting answer. And so, like, what does that look like for you then as you get under the hood and you try to figure out, like, what exactly it does or doesn't mean? I mean, like, what does the data scraping for that look like?
Yeah. This is a great question. And that's one of the big problems. There's not good public data. I actually am partnered with Sports Info Solutions. They've been really great to me and have some charted and more granular data to start to get into this. I think what I've treated special teams as heretofore, and even running into my 2025 model, is it's field position. Like that's the biggest advantage in special teams there, because points are so rare. And so I just ignore those and actually strip special teams points out of my adjusted scores because I don't believe they're, super sustainable week to week and reliable. And it does come through in field position. It's actually not a bad way to incorporate it, especially with my new thinking on that of just saying like, oh, that's something you can influence more. Like, great, that's wonderful. Like field position still matters and you want to get the best field position possible. But I think when you start to think about unit ratings, there's a couple things you can do in special teams to kind of make it better. I think counterfactuals in special teams are underexplored. So I don't care about net punts, right? I don't care about net punting yards. I think that's kind of silly. I care about punting yards over average. Like, what does an average college football punter do in any situation? How far do they punt? And then is your punter before or after that? And, or longer or closer than that, and bringing out like that. Field goal is really interesting. I know a lot of NFL teams are really interested in identifying field goal kickers, especially as it becomes more important with these guys hitting 60 and 70 yard field goals now. And the leverage just gets higher because you can optimize there. And so that's a couple things. One, you need good priors and an understanding of players to be able to update because you have smaller sample sizes. But then there's also huge selection bias in that as well. If you have a better kicker, you're going to try further field goals. That guy's going to miss more of them because they're harder. And his average field goal percentage is actually going to look worse than, somebody who only hits chip shots because he actually stinks. And so he only gets the easy catches. So ways to kind of peel back the layers. It's not like when I bring up a harebrained idea, like special teams or set pieces, it's not like, oh, I'm going to go reformulate my team model. I don't think that's going to make my model better. But when I'm diving into roster building, matchup understanding, scouting, I'm thinking about those things of, oh, this variable I know is important, field position. I actually think there's layers that I can dive into and kind of understand what's influencing that better so that I can make strategic choices to help us influence that variable that's important.
Awesome. Parker, one of the things that I look forward to every week from you is after the games, and I believe this is usually a Monday thing for you, is the "Did we really get beat that bad?" graphic that you put out, and it's obviously very fun to look at. Nebraska has been on the wrong end of this too many times to count over the last 5-6 years. What story does this tell? If someone stumbles upon it next week after the Nebraska-Michigan game, and they're like, okay, what am I looking at here? What are they looking at when you put this out? What story is this trying to tell?
On one level, I just need to acknowledge, and I've said this before, it's so dumb. It is maybe the dumbest graph I do. It is so funny. People get so upset about it, and it really is just silly. But I think it's super useful as well. It can be dumb and useful. And as you know, in saying it, there is an intentional grammatical error in the title, excuse me. And that's funny. Every week someone's like, you tries to correct the grammar and you're like, no, that's the whole point. It's like, do not take this too seriously, but it does provide some really nice kind of understanding of what happened in the game. Specifically, it's really nice to look at when the size of the bar and the direction of the bar of net success rate does not match up with the final outcome. It doesn't mean as much, hey, you didn't get outplayed or whatever. What we're doing with net success rate is just stripping out the noisier elements of success, turnovers, big plays, special teams, coaching, like all those things that are harder to measure. And we're just saying, okay, in the down-to-down business of moving the football, how close were the margins in this game? And you can look at a game like LSU and Florida last week, where LSU had a negative, 0.12 success rate, so 12 percentage points of success rate worse than Florida. And yeah, their offense was bad. Florida threw 5 interceptions. Like, that wasn't a great game from LSU. We're trying to separate out luck from skill. And this doesn't paint the whole picture, but it does give us an insight. And for me, historically, it started some really good conversations where I'll post that and the coach will DM me and be like, dude, come on, no way. Like, what? And I get to explain it to him and talk and be like, what do you think about this? And why do you think your success rate wasn't good and moving through? So I think especially when you can kind of picture these out of like, hey, did you have a positive net success rate and you lost? Well, great. Let's look what went wrong. And are those decisive plays sustainable or likely to carry over into the future? That's all we're trying to do here is understand, in the basics of football that you can control, did you outplay your opponent and lose on the margins? Great. Are those margins sustainable? Like, was it truly bad luck? Was it truly penalties that you could, if you had 6,000 false starts, great. That's on you. You got to fix that, right? But hey, it was wet and you recovered 1 of 4 forced fumbles or something. Like, hey, that's probably bad luck. Like, honestly, the football bounce is weird. So it's a fun graphic. No one should take it too seriously. Please like and share. It's the monetized economy. Everyone should be angry and send it out there. But I think really, if you're trying to learn about football, it's a good place to start for a game and say, hey, does this challenge my preconceived notions of the final score? And help me figure out how we kind of eliminate that. I think Andy Duke talks about like the self-serving bias where when we won, we played well. When we lost, we played poorly. When we lost, we were unlucky. And you want to avoid that, right? You want to say, no, did I play well and get unlucky, or did I play poorly and get lucky to win? You want to identify those. And that's one step down the road of starting to do that.
Well, definitely don't show this graph to Brian Kelly. I don't think he'll be too happy after the press conference.
I can guarantee with my experiences with Gary Patterson that Brian Kelly and I would have an explosive relationship. I welcome that relationship. I think it would be fun. I would love to get in a room and talk to him. But yeah, I don't think he would love my chart.
Slide into his DMs, Brian. One more, Parker, on this season and in particular this weekend, and then some other stuff before we let you go. Nebraska they started 3-0. Michigan has started 2-1. They're playing this weekend at 2:30. It's interesting, right? Because Nebraska had this close game in the opener versus another power school. And then they played a couple of, you mentioned Akron earlier, woof. And then they play an FCS school in Houston Christian. Meanwhile, Michigan plays a couple directional schools. One of them this past weekend goes a lot better than the one in week 1. And they have the loss to Oklahoma. Trying to strip away the noise, as you called it a few minutes ago. What are you seeing with this? Because Nebraska's looked so good the last 2 weeks. And as someone who does 4 hours of radio every day and multiple podcasts a week, I'm still trying to figure out, but what did I actually learn about them given the opposition that they played?
Yeah. So one, are we in the safe play? I know that you're Nebraska centric, so I want to be respectful of everyone's opinions and fandoms. Cincinnati probably should have won that game. I think you look at Brendan Sorsby and that final throw that was an interception and that route that it's going, it's like, dude, you throw it to the outside of your receiver or you throw it over your receiver's head. Just don't throw it to that one spot. And he threw it to that one spot and like the receiver was wide open. It was absolutely there. It's a hard throw. Sorsby is who he is and should make that throw more often than he doesn't, but didn't make it there. And I think that game was uncomfortably close for Nebraska against a team that shouldn't have been. So I was a little bit worried with what they were doing and whether, maybe they were caught up in the chiefs of it all in the Arrowhead and it's a big environment and there's, some nonsense there. But I think in general, we're seeing, year 3, Matt Rule is the joke and how much he can develop, but a guy who truly understands development and has been able to balance really well the understanding of development versus bringing in the portal and kind of reshuffling and filling your needs. They brought in Patrick Stewart, I believe, from New England to kind of help them with the financial and the planning side of that. Really, really interesting. And I think looking at Nebraska and looking at what they're doing this year, you can look at their offensive statistics. They're top 15 in EPA per play. Top, 12 in success rate, over 53% success rate. Some of that is, poor opponents and kind of what you're adjusting for there. But I think they're making the right steps. Looking at both of them this weekend and looking at kind of, how do I think about this matchup between two teams that have, dramatically different profiles and are kind of at different places, with Michigan, losing so much and kind of struggling last year. My thought was like to look at their 3 games and kind of understand what's the probability that their results were just due to randomness. Like, I'm going to have to explain this. And you're the first. I've texted this to 2 people. This is the 3rd time I'm saying this out loud, but I've done this and we're getting it live. So basically the idea is like, I was thinking about Florida specifically, and I'll get back to Nebraska and Michigan here in a minute, but like Florida saying, hey, what's the probability if the market accurately priced Florida in all 3 games and we knew their preseason spread, what's the probability that those games were just random variants? Like that, oh darn, like you just get a bad draw every so often, and the South Florida game was a bad draw. Well, you take, the pregame probability, you take the actual win margin, and you do a normal cumulative distribution function and say, what's the probability you win by at least X if you were favored by this, right? And so that's a lot of nonsense to say. I came up with a single number to say, how reliable can we trust your first 3 games? How much can we say, hey, these are just random variants, or no, we're pretty confident that you are who you are and what you've shown on the field. So for Florida, it was like 0.87% chance that they would get those results randomly. Like, they're bad. They're overpriced by the market. They're bad. But looking at Nebraska and looking at Michigan, Nebraska, their probability of their result being to randomness was 23.8%. So that's a high level of uncertainty. That's saying about a quarter of the time, if you were just flipping a coin for those 3 games, you'd win 3, right? And so with Nebraska, we're saying, we're not actually sure that their results aren't just variance, or that they've actually shown me something. Whereas Michigan, they're 1.9% chance that their results would be 2 variants. So we're saying, Michigan is actually better. Like, they're actually better than what we've seen, and or than what we thought and what the market priced them. So that's something I'm watching going into this, is kind of understanding at this point, I actually trust Michigan a little bit more than I trust Nebraska, just because there's a lot more uncertainty around Nebraska's performances. That being said, based on the preseason priors, I do have this very, very close. I think Nebraska would actually be favored at home here for me, but I have like 51% to Michigan in that as well.
Interesting.
Actually,
I love that.
I haven't had my coffee. Do I have that backwards there at Michigan, right?
No. You were right. It's in Lincoln this week. Yeah.
Oh, it is. No, sorry. It is in Lincoln. It's not.
It is in Lincoln. It's in Lincoln.
Okay. Yes. Weekend. So then flip exactly that. I do have Nebraska favored 51%. I just said that completely backwards. It's such a close toss up that home field advantage is making the decision here.
Wow. Fascinating. I love that answer. It's really interesting in terms of trying to figure out what is real versus not real. And that's, of course, what college football is, especially so early in the season when you want to have such strong convictions. Parker, how did you get into this? How did you get into the data aspect? I have to imagine you just loved college football and you were like, I wonder if this can tell a story. How did this all happen for you?
So I actually didn't really love college football until I grew up an Arkansas fan and watched all the 9 overtime stuff and, developed a lifelong anxiety disorder because of that. But I was always statsy. I would keep score at baseball and really like baseball. I was a religion major undergrad because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I added an econ minor just for fun, and decided to go back to school because I didn't know what I was going to do with a religion major. So I went and got a master's in economics, and actually ended up taking about 7 math classes in 4 semesters to get to the requisite math that I needed to carry on. And that was awesome. Shout out to one of my professors. I went to the University of Montana for my master's and love that place. One of my professors in linear algebra had us do big sky power ratings by calculating the eigenvalues of the by hand. It was awesome. It was super annoying, but I was like, oh, this is really cool. So as that happened, I was reading Bill. I knew Brian Freeman, was listening to podcasts. I played Nobody, all that good stuff that we've all done, and just started using the stuff I learned in the math classes to think about football because I was just bored in the math classes, honestly, and annoyed enough of my friends, especially in the TCU fear, where, shout out to Jamie Plunkett, who at a tailgate 3 beers in was like, hey, this is awesome. I can't follow any of this. Write this down, right for my site. Just write it down. And kind of pushed me to that. And they've been super supportive. And so I thought I kind of did all that anonymously, and then thought I was going to go be a professor in economics, and was applying to that. And somebody from Sumer Sports reached out, talked about an opening. I got connected with them and was like, oh, I could do this full time. So it's been a passion project, just doing it myself. I'm just curious. I'm just interested. Everything that I've built from the one sheet tools to every dumb graph I've made has been, hey, I'm interested in football and I'm interested in learning more. It's not, I really have never tried to be like, oh, let me create something that's going to get me a lot of views, or like, let me establish credibility or whatever. It's been, hey, I'm interested. And I think this is a good way to answer this question, and really have chased that while building up the technical skills, of course, doing the boring stuff in math and everything. But I think saying that, anybody who's interested in it, you can be an analyst tomorrow, create a Substack, create a website, whatever, public work, putting it out there, and just making sure you're asking and answering interesting questions with solid technical foundations. That is how you get noticed. The Big Data Bowl is coming up. I don't know if you've heard of that. The NFL releases some really advanced tracking data and says, go crazy on this. You want to work in sports? Great. Go win the Big Data Bowl and you will get hired. Go place in the Big Data Bowl and you will get hired. And so plenty of opportunities to get in there and create. You've got to have the technical foundations, and there's no better time to learn that online with, the resources that are out there for creating models and kind of understanding how to put that technical aspect in there.
Yeah, and Parker, you got in, obviously, it's such a great time, such an interesting time with social media, the internet blowing up like it did, where, a random guy in Nebraska is like, hey, I just want to kind of follow these rankings, or, the flashy graphics and stuff like that. Where is this going moving forward, in your opinion, with so many people being interested and so many people building models? And yet now, like, it seems like you got in at a great time. Now it's going to be a little bit harder for somebody starting. What does it look like?
Absolutely. And that's something I can totally acknowledge. Like, I mean, I believe I'm talented and have good skills. Some of these like recent grads are kicking my ass on the technical stuff, man, which is awesome. And fortunately, like with my current position, I'm at Blueprint and doing analytics and consulting for college teams there. I'm in a position where I can learn what I need to learn and build what I need to build, and also hire those really smart guys and deploy them and then get that as well. It is hard. And I think there's a little bit of truism in that like, as technological sophistication grows, like the younger generation is always going to be better at that. And so it's kind of hard, right? It is hard. Like, you got to keep working. The next, there's a kid that's in college right now who's going to come out with something better than I've got. Like, that's just the reality there. But I also have pivoted a little bit. Like, I think there's, neural network stuff I could do to make my model, X percentage points better and slightly better and find an edge and yada, yada. But I've actually really focused on the explainability and making sure I'm just knowing what I'm saying. Like, my model's good and I know what's going into it. And I'm fascinated by like the team building stuff. So I only say that to say, like, I think pivoting is important, like knowing what you're good at and being able to say, like, hey, I don't need to try to learn. I don't need to go take Stanford's machine learning 14-hour YouTube class and like learn all this random stuff that I may or may not know and get lost in the tools. What I need to do is keep asking interesting questions and then finding out what tools I need to solve them. So I think there's like an inherent entrepreneurship or innovation proclivity that comes with being an analyst. Like, there is no right answer. There is no, hey, just do this and you're going to be good at your job. And especially in the world of sports where it's so competitive, no offense to anyone who has, a BS job where you do one spreadsheet a day and then you scroll Twitter or whatever. Like, if you want to work in sports, that's not what you're going to do. And that's not the attitude you can have. And so I think there is like a little bit of hunger and curiosity to adapt and kind of get in and stay relevant. Like, really, I mean, I think that's really part of it.
Well, you ask interesting questions, and thus that gave some very interesting answers today. Parker Fleming, you can follow him on Twitter at StatsOWar. He has all sorts of great stuff there, great tools there that will make games, I think, more interesting. They certainly make games more interesting for me each and every weekend. Parker, thank you so much for taking the time and joining the I-80 football show today. Very much appreciate it.
Josh, always a pleasure, man. Enjoyed the conversation. Best of luck to your boys this weekend. Hopefully they confirm the numbers and pull one out.
Hope that you got as much out of that interview as I did. Parker was so much fun to talk to, and I hope to have him on the I-80 Club again sometime in the future. Also mentioned it beforehand, we have a lot of stuff coming up over the next few days. Big Ten Breakdown with Ben Stevens coming up on Friday. We have the coffee show. We have After Nebraska Football coming up on Saturday. On Sunday, we'll have a Before the Witching Hour NFL preview with Matt McMaster, yours truly. Ready for the Bears-Cowboys game. That'll be in the morning, and then there will be a volleyball state that night. If you want access to everything that we do, we recorded an I-80 Live on Wednesday, patreon.com/I-80 Club. And if you join the community tier for just $8 a month, you get access to the Discord server. Jack and I are in there all the time, chatting with our subscribers, watching games together, and so much more. It gets you all of what we are offering here inside of the I-80 Club. A like and a subscribe on the way out would be very much appreciated. A rating and a review wherever you listen to your podcast as well helps spread the word and introduce more people to the I-80 Club. Thanks again to Parker Fleming for joining me. I'm Josh Peterson. We'll talk to you next week.